you go. Okay. You will discover that the excuses explains the difference between the person who is barely going places and the person who is holding his own. You will find that the more successful the individual, the less inclined he is to make excuses. This is very true. But the fellow who has gone nowhere and has no plans for getting anywhere always has a book full of reasons to explain why. Persons with mediocre accomplishments are quick to explain why they haven't, why they can't, why they aren't. Study the lives of successful people and you'll discover this. All the excuses made by the mediocre fellow could be, but aren't made by the successful person. Big reason for that. We'll explain here. I haven't met nor heard of any successful business leader, military officer, salesman, professional person, or leader in any field who could not have found one or more major excuse to hide behind. Roosevelt could have hidden behind his lifeless legs. Truman could have used the no college education. Kennedy could have said, I'm too young to be president. Johnson and Eisenhower could have ducked behind heart attacks. Like any disease, excuse it gets worse. If it, I gotta think of a different word for excuse disease. No, I'll figure it out later. Like any disease, excutisits gets worse if it isn't treated properly. A victim of this thought disease goes through this mental process. I'm not doing as well as I should, so what should I say to save face? You want to save face because you don't want to look like a little bitch in front of other people when you don't accomplish shit. So, what is my excuse? Poor health? Lack of education? Too old? Too young? Mm, bad luck? Personal misfortune? Wife? My family? Once his victim of the failure disease has selected a good excuse, he sticks with it. Then he relies on the excuse to explain to himself and the others why I am not good. Oh, guys, I'm in a rut because of X, and X is what's going to keep me in this rut. Yeah, yeah, X is going to keep me in this rut no matter what. They'll come up to me like, what the fuck? Why? You know, well, because of X. X is too strong. And each time the victim makes his excuse, the excuse becomes embedded deeper within his subconsciousness. Thoughts, positive or negative, grow stronger when fertilized with constant repetition. At first, the victim of excuse disease knows his alibi is more or less a lie, but the more frequently he repeats it, the more convinced he becomes that it's absolutely true, that the alibi is the real reason for why he's not successful. And that's true. What you tell yourself is what's going to happen to you. The four most common forms of excuse disease. My health isn't good. Hmm, hold on a second. Ooh, I don't have the brains to succeed. We'll go over this one. Intelligence excuses these, or I like brains, is common. In fact, it's so common that perhaps as many as 95% of the people around us use it in different degrees. Unlike most types of excuses, people suffering from this particular type of malady suffer in silence. Not many people openly admit that they lack adequate intelligence. Rather, they feel it deep inside. Most of us make two basic errors when it comes to respect to intelligence. We underestimate our own brain power. We overestimate the guy next to us, his brain power. Because of these errors, many people sell themselves short. They fail to tackle challenging situations because, it takes too much of a brain. But along comes the fellow who isn't concerned about intelligence and he gets the job because he isn't overthinking. He grabs his balls and he just moves forward. You just gotta keep moving forward. What really matters is not how much intelligence you have, but how you use what you do have. The thinking that guides your intelligence is much more important than the quantity of your brain power. Now, must be very important because the author of this book says it three more times in these 2 pages. I just bit my tongue. Your thinking, the thinking that guides your intelligence, is much more important than the amount of intelligence that you have. The amount of intelligence you have is not as much as important as the thinking that guides that intelligence. In answering the question, should your child be a scientist? Dr. Edward Teller, one of the nation's foremost physicists, said, a child does not need a lightning fast mind to be a scientist, nor does he need a miraculous memory, nor is it necessary that he gets very good high grades in school. The only point that counts is the child have a high degree of interest in science. Interest, enthusiasm is the critical factor even in science. With a positive, with a positive, optimistic, and cooperative attitude of a person with an IQ of 100, a person with an IQ of 100 will earn more, become more successful, stronger willpower and win more respect than the negative, pessimistic, uncooperative little bitch with an IQ of 120. Just enough sense to stick with something, a chore, task, project until it's completed, pays off much better than idle intelligence. Even if idle intelligence be of genius caliber, stickability is 95% of ability. I'll journal about that one later. Another person I know well was inducted into the Army shortly after earning a PhD degree from a leading New York university. How did he spend his 3 years in the Army? Not as an officer, not as a staff specialist. Instead, for 3 years, he drove a truck. Why? Because he was filled with negative attitudes toward fellow soldiers. I'm superior to them. They're stupid. It's for others, not me. I don't need this. Including everything, even himself. I'm a fool for not figuring out how to escape this bullshit. This guy earned no respect from anyone. All his vast store of knowledge lay buried. His negative attitudes turned him into a flunky. Remember, he says it again. The thinking that guides your intelligence is much more important than the amount of intelligence you have. Not even a PhD degree can override this basic success principle. Out of every 100 people who enroll in college, fewer than 50 will graduate. That's actually interesting. I was curious about this, so I asked the director of admission at a large university for his explanation. It's not sufficient intelligence, he said. We don't admit them if they don't have sufficient ability. It's not money. Anyone who wants to support himself in college today can do so. The real reason is attitude. You would be surprised, he said, how many young people leave because they don't like their professors, the subjects they must take, and their fellow students. The same reason negative thinking explains why the door to top flight exiting positions is close to many young junior executives. Sour, negative, pessimistic, degrading attitudes rather than insufficient intelligence holds back thousands of young executives. As one executive told me, it's a rare case when we pass up a young fellow because he lacks brains. Nearly always it's attitude. So this is really going over the if you have the heart, then you can stay. Once I was retained by an insurance company to learn why the top 25% of the agents were selling over 75% of the insurance, while the bottom 25% of the agents sold only 5% of total value volume. Thousands of personal files were carefully checked. Knowledge is power when you use it constructively. That's a good place to end for today. Yeah. Takeaway from today. Mm, be careful what you believe. Make sure the things you believe in are the ones that will take you further.